Hello everyone, I'm really sorry that I'm not here today. I have another cold, and as we know, you need to keep your germs to yourself, which is why I'm not here. So this will be a self-directed, self-paced learning. Now, I know that when I was away last time, some of you did not keep up with the note-taking, which, given that you have a test coming up, is not a smart move. So I expect you all to be taking notes while you're watching this video by pausing it, and I will be directing you to what information I believe is most important as you go through this lesson. I will be checking with you on Wednesday whether you've done the notes, and if you haven't, you're going to have to come up with a pretty good reason as to why. So expect to have that conversation with me on Wednesday. Okay. So we're looking at the importance of microorganisms. So our two learning intentions for today is that microorganisms are important living things and that microorganisms include bacteria, fungi, and protists. Okay, so we're going to look specifically at the types of organisms first before moving on to a specific microorganism, bacteria. So this is the tree of life. I don't know if any of you have seen this before. It's quite basic, but we have three areas: bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. If we have a look here, animals are just kind of classified as one strand, but we know that there are lots of different animals. As I move through all of the microorganisms I'm going to talk about today, I'm changing from bacteria to archaea to eukarya, so I just want you to understand that microorganisms are purely about the size, not that they are a particular branch of life. So we're starting with bacteria. A couple of examples of different bacteria include coccus. So an example of coccus is streptococcus, which causes strep throat, and that bacteria is heterotrophic, which is this one up here. What that means is that it requires energy from other organisms by consumption in order to live. Another example is Vibrio, which is cholera. It causes severe diarrhea. So if you've ever been to a third world country, cholera is quite a common one because they don't have very good sewage, and it's often in the water supply. Again, this one is heterotrophic, which means that it needs to consume other microorganisms in order for it to get its energy. The last one I'm talking about is Spirulium. So these are all different shapes, by the way. So coccus is like pea-shaped, whereas Vibrio is more of a little curved one, and Spirulium, as the name would suggest, is spiral. An example is cyanobacteria, also most commonly known as blue-green algae, and it's autotrophic. So what that means is that it photosynthesizes to get its energy. So I'd like you to write down examples of bacteria, which is a microorganism, coccus, an example being streptococcus, which is heterotrophic, Vibrio, which is cholera, which again is heterotrophic, and Spirulium, which is cyanobacteria, which is autotrophic. You can put what they cause if that helps you to remind you. That's up to you. Making sure that you pause the video here to do that before moving on. Okay, now we're moving over to archaea. So archaea, in terms of types of archaea in microorganisms, they're known generally as what we call extremophiles. And that means extreme means living on the edge of the limit, whereas phile means loving. So they live in really extreme conditions, and that's where they thrive. So an example, or a couple of examples, include thermophiles. Thermo meaning temperature. So they like really hot or very cold conditions, like these black smokers here, which are on the bottom of the ocean. Very hot liquid, like 300 degrees Celsius, and you've got bacteria that live here. We've got halophiles, which are like very salty condition. Halon is another word for salt. So like this salt lake here. And then we've got acidophiles, which like very acidic conditions. So writing archaea, known as extremophiles, so they live in extreme conditions, thermophiles, halophiles, and acidophiles. Alright, so now we're moving over to eukarya and we're looking specifically at fungi. So, fungi can be on the micro or macroscopic level. So, micro means you like bread mold, for example, whereas macro refers to your mushrooms and your toadstools. So, we'll just keep it with an example of a fungi microorganism is bread mold. So, writing that down. Okay, we're staying in eukarya and we're moving over to amoebozoa. So these are called or known as protistas, and they are single-cell eukaryotic organisms. An example is an amoeba. This amoeba over here, I'll talk about that in a second. And it does contain a nucleus and a membrane-bound organelle. And it's heterotrophic, which means it needs to consume. So if we have a look over here in this GIF, when it starts again, this is the amoeba, and these are two little other microorganisms. What the amoeba does is it actually is engulfing, it's hunting these two microorganisms and will digest and consume them. So that's an example of how it actually is heterotrophic. It eats other organisms. Making sure you're writing that down. Okay, we're staying in eukarya and we're looking at algae this time. We're not looking at plants, we're looking at red and green. So algae are autotrophic organisms on the micro scale or the macro scale. So an example of the micro scale is phytoplankton. And they are basically the bottom of the food chain for marine and freshwater environments. They're essentially the grass of the ocean on a microscopic level. But we also have kelp forests, which is what these are. They're more macroscopic. So algae, autotrophic organisms, phytoplankton, which live in marine environments. Staying in eukarya, I've just got one more example. This one I kind of put in mainly because it's quite amazing. You don't actually need to write this one down, but I just thought you'd be interested to see. So these ones are called dinoflagellates, and they are bioluminescent. So if you're a fan of David Attenborough, he did a series on bioluminescence called Life That Glows. So bio means living, luminescent means to glow. So we've got living organisms that produce light, and these ones, dinoflagellates, they produce light when they're agitated in the water. So if we have a look at this GIF here, we've got some dolphins that are swimming off the bow of a boat, and there's dinoflagellates all through the water. And again, these are microscopic little microorganisms, but as they are agitated, they glow, which is why you can see the outline of the dolphins. Now, this was actually filmed in Tasmania. I don't know of any other places where we've had them, but they do occur otherwise, but just thought that they would be quite nice for you to have a look at. Okay, so I just want to quickly address a misconception. Viruses are not a microorganism because they're not alive, okay? We know that life needs to carry out processes and it needs to be able to reproduce. A virus can't do that, and it only reproduces in a host cell. So I'll be writing down viruses are not microorganisms because they are not living. Okay, so now we're going to look specifically at bacteria and why we, I guess, would be interested in the conditions for reproduction. We're going to take a look at this from a human health point of view. So hopefully none of you have experienced food poisoning before. So that's actually where you consume harmful bacteria that grow causes your body to reject it and is really unpleasant. So the reason why we're looking at the conditions for reproduction and growth is to make sure that we don't treat our food in those conditions so that it doesn't happen. So the bacterial growth conditions, and I've kind of already mentioned this with E. coli and Salmonella, the process is binary fission because bacteria are prokaryotes. The reproduction time is as little as 20 minutes, and you can have exponential growth over a number of hours if left in a suitable environment. So I'll be writing this down: bacterial growth conditions, binary fission, as little as 20 minutes, and needs a suitable environment. But you're probably wondering, what is a suitable environment? There are several conditions that require, or that bacteria require to grow in that exponential manner. Now I'm going to go through these in more detail, so you don't need to write them down right now. I'll go through all of them one by one and give you a little bit more information. So temperature is the first one. This is, again, mainly in the context of food and how to treat your food properly. For those of you that are doing food or vet courses, food technology, you need to make sure that you don't keep food in what this danger zone is, which is between 5 and 60 degrees Celsius. So if you keep it in below 60 and between 5, in this area here, the temperature is prime for bacterial growth. That's why we have refrigerated foods. That's why we keep them in the fridge, and that's why we also cook our food as well, to make sure that there's no bacteria. And if there are, we kill the bacteria. You're just eating dead bacteria. So bacteria does need nutrients, otherwise it can't function properly, can't reproduce. So bacteria does need carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, and oxygen. So I'll be writing down the use of nutrients and writing these 5 down. Bacteria also needs moisture. So all bacteria needs moisture to survive, and it needs to have a balance between the inside and outside of the cell, which we know is a process called osmosis. So water to solute or salt balance is required as well. So writing down that moisture is essential. An optimum pH is also required. So most bacteria flourish at about 7.2 to 7.4, which is around a neutral pH. Often what we'll do is we will store things in an acidic, like canned food, for example. So tomato juice is a really good natural, stops the growth of bacteria. Same with lemon juice as well. The gastric acid in your stomach, which has a pH of, I think it's like 0.8, is there to also kill any bacteria that might actually get into your stomach. Okay, and the last one is removal of waste. So bacteria needs to remove waste because if the build-up happens, it can become toxic and the colony will die. So it's really important that bacteria are able to remove their waste. Alright, one of the main important, reasons that we're, looking at microorganisms is that they are essential for recycling nutrients. There are 40 essential nutrients that sustain life on Earth, and they can only be returned to the ecosystem through their breakdown by microorganisms like bacteria and fungi. So I'll be writing down that entire sentence if I were you. So the way that they do this is consuming dead plants and animals, and this reduces all of those complex structures within the animals and plants into a simpler form of matter, which is your nutrients: carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, oxygen. We've all heard of those cycles, particularly these 3. Okay, so that's the really essential process by both fungi and bacteria. Okay, so by the end of this lesson, you should be able to list and give examples of the different types of microorganisms, describe the living conditions needed for bacterial growth, and explain the importance of decomposers in making nutrients available for life on Earth. I hope to see all of you on Wednesday.